Chapter 1: The Codex of Secrets. In the thriving port city of Venice during the 15th century, where the Adriatic waters shimmered under golden sunsets and lapped gently against marble palazzas, the Biblioteca Marciana stood as a monument to knowledge. With its grand arches and intricate frescoes, it was a sanctuary for scholars and a beacon for the curious. Amid this grandeur, Marco Bellini, the quiet custodian of the library, lived a life of humble routine. Marco was an unassuming man, often overshadowed by the flamboyant Venetian nobles who frequented the library to impress their peers with casual references to philosophy and science. Yet beneath his reserved demeanor lay a mind ablaze with curiosity. He was a man of contradictions, content with solitude but restless in his pursuit of understanding. His modest quarters above the library were a testament to his passions. Shelves groaned under the weight of scrolls and tomes, while his work table was perpetually cluttered with ink-stained notes, quills, and half-deciphered manuscripts. Marco's fascination lay with the ancient and the obscure. While others sought wealth or influence, he sought meaning hidden in the faded pages of forgotten texts. The Biblioteca Marciana, with its vast collection of manuscripts sourced from across the known world, was both his workplace and his sanctuary. He often stayed late into the night, sifting through dusty tomes and newly arrived scrolls, driven by a quiet, unshakable belief that within these pages lay the keys to mysteries long abandoned by time. The night of discovery. One stormy evening, as thunder rumbled ominously over the Venetian skyline, Marco found himself alone in the library. The rain pounded against the stained glass windows, the sound blending with the creaks of the old wooden beams and the occasional flicker of the oil lamps that lit his desk. Outside, the canals were restless, the water churning in a rhythm that seemed almost sentient. Marco had been cataloguing a recent shipment from the East, a collection of texts acquired through a trade network that stretched from Venice to the Levant. The crates were filled with diverse works, illuminated manuscripts, faded papyri, and scrolls bearing intricate calligraphy. Amid these treasures, his hand brushed against something peculiar. It was a manuscript unlike any he had ever seen. Bound in cracked, weathered leather, its surface bore faint traces of embossing, perhaps a title or a crest, but time had rendered them illegible. As Marco lifted it, he noticed its distinct weight and the faint scent it exuded, saffron and aged parchment, a combination that spoke of distant origins. He opened the manuscript with care, his breath catching as his eyes met the intricate script inside. It was written in an undecipherable hand, a bewildering mix of symbols and characters that defied any single linguistic tradition. Greek, Arabic, and Latin seemed to merge and overlap in a dance of meaning that remained just out of reach. The ink, though faded, retained a vibrancy that suggested it was no ordinary text. Marco frowned and consulted the library's meticulously kept records. Yet, there was no mention of this manuscript among the recent acquisitions. Its origin was a mystery, and its presence felt almost deliberate. His pulse quickened as he recalled rumors whispered among scholars, tales of lost codices, manuscripts said to contain knowledge from ancient civilizations, knowledge that could change the course of history. The obsession begins. From that moment, Marco was captivated. His days became a blur of routine tasks, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of the codex. By night, he would return to the manuscript, spreading it out on his desk under the warm glow of his lamps. He meticulously transcribed its symbols, comparing them against every reference he could find. Patterns began to emerge, a recurring sequence here, a mirrored symbol there, but their meaning remained elusive. Marco's fingers traced the shapes again and again, as if hoping the tactile connection would bridge the gap between him and the unknown scribe who had penned them centuries ago. He began to feel an almost spiritual bond with this mysterious author, a connection that both thrilled and unsettled him. As the weeks wore on, Marco's obsession deepened. He barely slept, his dreams filled with fragmented images of ancient cities, golden sands, and towering monoliths inscribed with the codex's strange symbols. The manuscript seemed to pull him into its orbit, an enigmatic siren song he could not ignore. Shadows and whispers. It was during one of these long nights that the first strange occurrence took place. Marco had been working late, the storm outside mirroring the storm of thoughts in his mind. The library was silent except for the steady scratching of his quill. Then, faintly, he heard it, a whisper. At first, he dismissed it as the wind rattling through the library's high windows. But as the nights passed, the whispers grew more distinct. They seemed to echo through the marble halls, their source elusive. Marco began to notice other oddities. Shadows flitted at the edges of his vision, disappearing the moment he turned his head. Books and scrolls he swore he had left in one place would appear in another, as if moved by unseen hands. He tried to dismiss these incidents as the product of his exhaustion, but the feeling of being watched became impossible to ignore. The once comforting solitude of the library now felt oppressive, the familiar halls cloaked in an atmosphere of unease. A sense of dread. One night, as Marco traced the symbols of the codex for the 100th time, he paused. The ink on the page seemed to shimmer, as if alive. A chill ran down his spine, and he looked up abruptly, convinced he was not alone. The library's vast expanse stretched out before him, its shelves casting long, ominous shadows in the flickering light. "Is someone there?" he called, his voice trembling. Silence. Yet the feeling persisted, an almost tangible presence pressing against him. Marco forced himself to return to the manuscript, but his hands shook as he turned the pages. For the first time, he questioned whether the codex was a blessing or a curse. As dawn broke over the city, casting its golden light on the Adriatic, Marco stared out his window, the codex clutched in his hands. He knew he was standing at the threshold of something extraordinary. Yet with every step closer to uncovering the manuscript's secrets, the shadows around him grew darker, and the line between reality and imagination began to blur. Little did he know, his discovery was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge not just his intellect but his very understanding of the world, and his place within it. Chapter 2: An Unexpected Ally. In the days following Marco's discovery, whispers about the enigmatic manuscript began to spread. At first, it was just passing remarks exchanged among scholars who frequented the Biblioteca Marciana, casual speculations about an unusual text in the library's collection. But as Marco delved deeper into the codex, his occasional inquiries about symbols and scripts caught the attention of the city's intellectual elite. Word traveled swiftly through Venice's bustling academies and merchants' guilds, fueled by curiosity and rivalry. Among those who heard of Marco's find was Alessandra Contarini, a name spoken with equal measures of reverence and caution in scholarly circles. Alessandra was a woman of formidable intellect and even greater ambition. As a cartographer and polymath, she had earned her reputation by challenging long-held beliefs about the known world, her theories often venturing into the realm of the speculative and the daring. She mapped not just territories but ideas, connecting disparate threads of knowledge into audacious conclusions. Alessandra arrives. One crisp morning, as the bells of San Marco echoed across the piazza, Marco was startled by the sound of firm footsteps approaching his desk. Looking up, he found himself face to face with Alessandra Contarini. She stood tall and composed, her bearing as commanding as a ship's captain at the helm. Her piercing grey eyes seemed to dissect him in an instant, as though weighing his worth against her considerable standards. "You are Marco Bellini," she stated, her voice steady and unyielding, more declaration than question. Marco blinked, momentarily stunned. Alessandra's reputation preceded her, but he had never imagined she would appear unannounced in the library. "Yes, Signora Contarini. How may I assist you?" She offered a faint, knowing smile. "You have something extraordinary, Signore Bellini. And I intend to help you uncover it." Her directness left Marco momentarily speechless. He glanced around, half expecting others to emerge from the shadows, but they were alone. "I'm not sure what you mean," he replied cautiously, his instinct to protect the codex warring with his curiosity about Alessandra's intentions. "Come now," she said, stepping closer. "The codex. Word of it has reached even the most reluctant ears. An undeciphered manuscript of unknown origin? Such treasures do not remain secret for long." Marco hesitated, his fingers twitching nervously at the edge of his desk. Alessandra's reputation as a brilliant but polarizing figure was both an asset and a liability. If she truly could help, it might unravel the mystery of the codex faster than he could alone. Yet her involvement also risked drawing more attention and danger. After a long pause, he nodded. "Very well. I will show it to you." The partnership begins. Under the flickering light of oil lamps, Alessandra examined the codex with a critical eye. Her movements were methodical, each gesture imbued with a sense of purpose. She traced the symbols with her fingers, muttering observations under her breath. Marco watched her work, torn between admiration and anxiety. "These symbols," she said finally, "are not merely decorative. They follow patterns I've seen before, patterns used in ancient cartographic codes." "Cartographic codes?" Marco asked, leaning forward in his chair. Alessandra nodded. Medieval navigators often encoded their maps to protect trade routes or conceal the locations of valuable resources. This manuscript may be a guide. "A guide to what?" Marco's voice was tinged with both awe and fear. "That," Alessandra replied, meeting his gaze with a spark of determination, "we'll have to discover together." From that moment, their partnership took shape. Alessandra brought a fresh perspective to the codex, her knowledge of ancient navigation and cryptography unlocking connections Marco had overlooked. She identified recurring motifs tied to celestial navigation and symbols resembling landmarks described in ancient travelogues. Marco, in turn, contributed his meticulous research and deep familiarity with the library's archives, unearthing texts that provided crucial context for their work. Growing dangers. As their collaboration deepened, so too did the risks surrounding them. Word of the codex had reached less scrupulous ears, chief among them Ludovico Farnese, a rival scholar with a reputation for ruthless ambition. Farnese had long sought to elevate his standing through any means necessary, and the prospect of possessing the codex, and the power it might bestow, was too tempting for him to resist. Rumors began to trickle in. Merchants who frequented the library mentioned Farnese spies loitering in the piazza, their eyes scanning the comings and goings of its patrons. Marco noticed strangers lingering near the library's entrance, their gazes lingering on him a fraction too long. Alessandra, ever astute, warned him to trust no one outside their immediate circle. Farnese will not hesitate to use force if he believes it will serve his purposes, she said one evening as they worked by the light of a single lamp. We must stay ahead of him. Their caution proved justified. Late one night, as Marco returned to his quarters, he found the door ajar. Inside, the room had been ransacked. Books lay scattered, scrolls unfurled, and his desk drawers emptied. Though the codex remained safely hidden in a secret compartment beneath the library's main desk, the intrusion was a clear warning. They know, Alessandra said grimly when Marco recounted the incident. Farnese men are becoming bold. We must work quickly. A fragile trust. Despite the growing tension, Marco and Alessandra's partnership began to transform into something more. Their late-night sessions were marked not only by breakthroughs but by moments of camaraderie and mutual respect. Alessandra's sharp wit often drew a reluctant smile from Marco, while her unwavering confidence bolstered his own resolve. Yet, their alliance was not without friction. Alessandra's boldness sometimes clashed with Marco's cautious nature, her willingness to take risks leaving him uneasy. One evening, after a heated debate about whether to seek additional allies, Marco finally voiced his concerns. Your reputation, he said carefully, is both a strength and a danger. If Farnese suspects we are working together, it will only embolden him. Alessandra met his gaze, her expression softening. And yet, without my expertise, you would still be staring at symbols without meaning. We need each other, Marco. Whatever dangers arise, we face them together. Her words, though firm, carried a note of reassurance. Marco nodded, the tension easing slightly. Despite their differences, he knew she was right. The codex was too important to abandon, and their shared determination was their greatest asset. The unraveling mystery. Over the following weeks, the codex began to yield its secrets. Alessandra's theory of it being a guide grew stronger as they identified symbols correlating to ancient maps and star charts. One particularly stunning discovery was a set of coordinates hidden within a sequence of symbols, pointing to a location far from Venice. This, Alessandra said, her voice barely above a whisper, is the key. To what? Marco asked, his pulse quickening. Alessandra's eyes gleamed with excitement. Something extraordinary. Something worth protecting at any cost. But as their understanding of the codex deepened, so too did the threats against them. The game had begun in earnest, and they were no longer the only players. Chapter 3: The Chase Begins. The storm had passed, leaving a chill in the air, but the oppressive weight of unease never lifted from Marco's shoulders. For days, he had been wrestling with the implications of the discoveries he and Alessandra had made, pondering the significance of the codex in the grand scheme of history. He had begun to envision the kind of knowledge it might contain, secrets lost to time, powerful truths that could alter the course of civilization. And yet, with every hour that passed, the library, once his sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. One evening, as the fading light of day was swallowed by the darkening sky, Marco returned to the Biblioteca Marciana after a long day of research. The usually serene atmosphere was charged with an odd stillness as he ascended the steps to the library's grand entrance. It was only when he reached the heavy wooden doors that a sense of dread clawed at him. The door was ajar. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach as he pushed it open. The familiar scent of parchment and ink that always filled the air was replaced by a stifling silence, thick with the absence of life. His gaze swept over the room, and everything that had once been meticulously arranged, every book, every scroll, was now in disarray. Books lay overturned on the floor, priceless manuscripts were torn open, their fragile pages strewn about like discarded remnants. In the center of the room, the codex was gone. A cold shiver ran down Marco's spine. The place where the manuscript had rested for weeks was now empty, save for a lone piece of parchment lying on the desk. Marco's hand trembled as he picked it up. The ink was still fresh, the script unmistakable. His eyes widened as he read the chilling words. "Truth is not for the timid." The signature at the bottom was like a mark of doom, Ludovico. Marco felt his pulse quicken as the weight of the situation sank in. Ludovico Farnese, his rival, his nemesis, the man who would stop at nothing to seize control of the secrets Marco had uncovered, had taken the codex. It was no longer a matter of deciphering its cryptic contents. The codex was a key, and in the wrong hands, it could unlock powers beyond anything Marco could have anticipated. Alessandra's resolve. He was still standing in the wreckage of the library when Alessandra arrived. She moved swiftly and silently, her face a mask of focus. There was no need for words. She understood immediately what had happened, the ruin of the library and the stolen codex confirming her worst fears. The two of them stood together in grim silence for a moment, the weight of their shared understanding settling like a fog between them. "We have to act quickly," Alessandra said, her voice steely with resolve. "Ludovico is heading to Constantinople. The codex must mean more to him than we realized." Marco's stomach tightened. The thought of chasing Ludovico across the Mediterranean was daunting. They had already tangled with danger in Venice, now they would have to face it on the open seas, a place far less predictable and even more treacherous. Yet, despite the fear that gripped him, Marco knew there was no choice. The knowledge within the codex could change the course of history, but in Ludovico's hands, it could be a weapon of unimaginable power. "We cannot afford to lose him," Marco replied, his voice shaky but firm. "We must follow him." The perils of the sea. The journey from Venice to Constantinople would take several weeks, but Marco and Alessandra knew the risks of waiting. They had no time to lose. They secured passage on a merchant ship bound for the great city across the sea, hoping that the large, well-traveled vessel would provide the necessary cover to avoid detection. They sailed under the cover of night, the dark waters of the Adriatic stretching before them like an endless expanse of uncertainty. The ship's crew was a motley group, hardened men who had weathered countless storms and seen the worst of the Mediterranean's dangers. Yet even they could not predict what awaited them. The sea was cruel and fickle, its waves often surging without warning, as if the waters themselves resented the intrusion of the ship. Marco found little comfort in the rhythm of the ship's creaking timbers, and the constant motion of the waves seemed to mock his sense of calm. But worse than the seas were the pirates. The Mediterranean was rife with opportunistic raiders, and Marco knew that the ship, with its valuable cargo and foreign passengers, would be a prime target. They sailed through the night, staying close to the coastlines whenever possible, but danger was always lurking. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lookout cried out in alarm. Marco rushed to the deck, his heart pounding as he saw the sails of two pirate ships emerging from the mist like specters. The crew sprang into action, scrambling to ready the ship's defenses. Alessandra, ever resourceful, joined them, her sharp mind offering strategic insights as the ship's captain barked orders. Marco stood back, his eyes scanning the approaching vessels. It was only a matter of time before the pirates would close in, and the likelihood of escape was slim. But as the pirates drew near, a sudden storm appeared on the horizon, dark clouds swirling and crashing against each other with terrifying force. The winds howled, and the sea turned violent. The pirates hesitated, momentarily thrown off by the storm, but the ship's crew seized the opportunity. With incredible skill, they maneuvered their vessel into a narrow channel between jagged rocks, forcing the pirates to follow. But the storm was merciless, and the pirate ships were soon caught in the tempest, their sails shredded by the ferocious winds. The merchant ship, battered but intact, sailed on, its crew battered but victorious. Marco and Alessandra shared a brief moment of relief, though both knew it was fleeting. Their journey was far from over, and each day brought them closer to Constantinople and to Ludovico. Tension and bond. As the days passed, the journey became a test of endurance. Marco found himself growing more weary, the endless rhythm of the ship's motion playing on his nerves. The days were long, filled with the monotony of salt air and the constant churn of the waves. Alessandra, ever pragmatic, maintained a stoic exterior, but even she seemed affected by the isolation of life at sea. Despite the exhaustion, there was a growing bond between them, one that was born out of necessity but also something deeper, something unspoken. Alessandra's sharp intellect and unwavering determination had become a source of strength for Marco, and in turn, his steadiness and thoughtfulness had grounded her. They shared their quiet moments of reflection, often speaking in hushed tones under the starlit sky. One evening, as they stood together on the deck, watching the stars shimmer above the rolling sea, Marco found himself confiding in her. "I've never known fear like this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not just the danger to myself. It's the knowledge that someone else might uncover the secrets before I do, someone like Ludovico, who would use it for power." Alessandra turned to him, her eyes softening. "I understand, Marco. But you must remember, this is not just your fight. We're in this together. And together, we'll uncover the truth." Her words offered a sense of comfort, and in that moment, Marco realized that their shared journey had forged a connection that went beyond their quest for knowledge. They were partners in every sense of the word, bound not just by the codex, but by the undeniable bond they had formed. A final destination. As the ship neared the shores of Constantinople, the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon. The bustling port city was just visible on the distant shore, its minarets and domes rising like a beacon, promising both opportunity and danger. Marco's heart raced, knowing that soon they would find themselves in the midst of the very intrigue they had spent weeks trying to outrun. They were about to confront Ludovico, and perhaps uncover the greatest mystery of their lives. But even as they approached the city, Marco knew that the true test was still ahead. The codex had already cost them dearly, and it seemed that whatever secrets it contained would continue to shape their fates in ways they could scarcely imagine. In the distance, the faint outline of Constantinople shimmered, and Marco's determination hardened. The chase had only just begun. Chapter 4: A City of Intrigue. The scent of saltwater, spices, and incense mingled in the air as the merchant ship finally anchored in the bustling harbor of Constantinople. The towering city sprawled before them like a living tapestry, a blend of East and West, of cultures and philosophies old and new. Marco Bellini and Alessandra Contarini stepped off the ship, their boots kissing the cobbled stones of the dock. The city was alive, pulsing with the hum of human activity. Merchants, sailors, scholars, and adventurers from all corners of the world flowed through the streets, their voices rising in a cacophony of languages. Constantinople was a place of stories, of hidden histories and powerful secrets, a city whose walls held the whispers of empires long past and empires yet to come. Marco felt a shiver of awe and dread as he gazed at the soaring minarets of the Hagia Sophia, their sharp silhouettes cutting against the pale sky. The golden dome of the great mosque caught the sun's fading rays, casting a soft glow over the entire city. Yet, even as he marveled at the splendor of it all, Marco was acutely aware that his purpose here was anything but celebratory. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Ludovico Farnese, the man who had stolen the codex and now lurked somewhere within this city of intrigue. Alessandra, ever perceptive, caught the unease that lingered in Marco's eyes. "We'll find him," she said, her voice steady and sure. "We just have to be patient and use the city's web to our advantage." Marco nodded, though the weight of their mission pressed heavily on his chest. They had crossed an ocean, survived pirates, and braved dangerous waters, all to find Ludovico and retrieve the codex. The manuscript had become more than just a key to ancient knowledge, it was now a symbol of something far greater, the control of knowledge, of power, and the course of history itself. The labyrinthine streets of Constantinople. The heart of Constantinople was a maze of narrow alleyways and grand boulevards, where the old and the new collided at every corner. The ancient Byzantine walls, now crumbling in places, stood alongside newly built Ottoman structures, their spires rising into the sky like the ambitions of those who ruled. The bustling marketplaces were alive with the sounds of bartering merchants, hawking exotic spices, silks, and precious stones. Marco and Alessandra moved through these streets with quiet determination, their eyes scanning the crowds for any sign of Ludovico or his spies. To navigate this intricate web of intrigue, they relied on local informants, trusted men and women who knew the undercurrents of the city's politics, trade, and criminal underworld. Their inquiries led them to a name, the wealthy Armenian merchant named Aslan, who had connections to the city's hidden scholars. It was said that Aslan had an extensive library, one that contained forbidden texts and rare manuscripts. It wasn't difficult to deduce that Ludovico had sought refuge there, surrounded by those who could help him decode the secrets of the stolen codex. As they ventured deeper into the city, the shadows of the past seemed to follow them. Constantinople, with its tangled mix of Byzantine, Roman, and Ottoman influences, was a city of contrasts. The cries of street vendors were layered over the solemn chants of monks in their hidden monasteries, and the clash of cultures was palpable at every turn. Alessandra, ever the scholar, marveled at the layers of knowledge and history that seemed to seep out of every stone. But Marco was less focused on the city's beauty and more on the task at hand. Every day, they grew closer to finding Ludovico, and the closer they came, the more dangerous the game became. The merchant's villa. It was under the cover of darkness that Marco and Alessandra finally found themselves standing before the massive wooden gates of Aslan's villa, tucked away in a quieter district of the city. The villa was a mix of lavish Ottoman architecture and ancient Byzantine influences, a testament to the wealth and status of its owner. Intricate carvings adorned the stone facade, and torches flickered in the night, casting long shadows that danced along the villa's walls. "Are you sure about this?" Marco asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once we enter, there's no turning back." Alessandra's grey eyes gleamed with a mix of resolve and excitement. "We've come this far. There's no other choice." The plan was simple: infiltrate the villa, locate the codex, and leave undetected. They had learned from their contacts that Aslan's villa had a hidden chamber, one used for storing precious and secretive items. It was there that Ludovico had hidden the manuscript, surrounded by layers of protection and secrecy. Marco's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the entrance, and his mind raced with questions about what they might find inside. He had no doubt that Ludovico was dangerous, but would he be prepared for what awaited them? The villa's entrance was guarded by two imposing figures, silent, watchful men who had the look of seasoned bodyguards. Marco and Alessandra, blending in with the crowd of late-night revelers who frequented the villa for its lavish parties, managed to slip past the guards unnoticed. They made their way through the courtyard, where fountains gurgled with fresh water and the scent of flowers mingled with the smoke of burning incense. Once inside, they moved quickly, navigating the maze of opulent rooms and hallways. The villa was a labyrinth in itself, with doors leading to hidden chambers and passages that twisted and turned like the very city outside. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for: a heavy wooden door leading to a spiral staircase that descended deep beneath the villa. It was there, they knew, that the codex awaited. The gilded chest. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a dimly lit room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with strange artifacts and rare manuscripts that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The air smelled musty, the scent of old parchment and dust filling their lungs. Marco's eye scanned the room, searching for the codex. Then, in the far corner, he saw it, a gilded chest, its surface etched with delicate patterns of unknown origin. It was locked, but Marco knew that the manuscript would be inside. His pulse quickened as he approached the chest, his fingers trembling in anticipation. He knew the risks, but this was it, the moment they had been working towards for so long. With a soft click, the lock released, and Marco lifted the lid. Inside lay the codex, its leather cover worn but still intact. Marco felt a surge of relief as his fingers brushed over its surface, the familiar texture grounding him in the midst of their perilous journey. But before he could pull the manuscript from the chest, a harsh voice cut through the silence. "You should have stayed in Venice, Signore Bellini." Marco turned sharply, and there, standing in the doorway, was Ludovico Farnese, flanked by several armed men. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Marco's, and a wicked smile curled at the corners of his lips. Alessandra's hand moved to her dagger, but Ludovico's men were quick to draw their own weapons, surrounding them on all sides. The tension in the room thickened, the standoff hanging in the air like an impending storm. "You've been chasing shadows, Marco," Ludovico sneered. "This knowledge is mine to claim. You've no idea what you're dealing with." A tense silence followed as the two men exchanged a look, each calculating the other's next move. Marco's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. He knew that their time was running out. The escape. It was then that Alessandra's sharp eyes caught a glint of metal on the floor, something out of place, a subtle reflection of light. A hidden trapdoor. Without missing a beat, she gave Marco a silent signal. As Ludovico's men moved closer, ready to strike, Alessandra kicked the trapdoor open with all her strength. The floor gave way beneath them, and they plunged into the darkness below. Ludovico's curses echoed above them, but they didn't stop. They fell into the underground passageway, the sound of their breaths ragged as they tumbled down the stone steps. The city's ancient cistern stretched before them, a vast network of tunnels that had long since been abandoned. The cool, damp air of the underground enveloped them, and Marco's heart raced as he scrambled to his feet. "Keep moving," Alessandra hissed, pulling Marco forward. They ran through the dark, the echo of their footsteps the only sound as they weaved through the labyrinth of the cisterns. Marco could hear Ludovico's men above, their pursuit relentless. But even as they fled, Marco knew that the chase was far from over. The codex was still in his hands, but its true power was yet to be revealed. They pushed on, deeper into the shadows of Constantinople, their breaths quickening, but their resolve stronger than ever. The city, with all its mystery and danger, had become both their refuge and their battleground. The chase had only just begun. Chapter 5: Decoding the Past. The monastery was a sanctuary of stone and silence, perched on a rugged hill outside Constantinople. Its secluded location offered Marco and Alessandra a brief reprieve from the relentless pursuit of Ludovico Farnese. The air here was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of cypress and wildflowers. Within the thick walls of the ancient structure, monks moved about their duties with quiet devotion, their chants a soothing backdrop to Marco and Alessandra's work. Their refuge, however, was not without its burdens. The codex, retrieved at great cost, seemed almost alive in its complexity. Each page was a puzzle, layers of languages and symbols intertwined with a brilliance that defied immediate understanding. Marco and Alessandra labored by candlelight in the monastery's dimly lit scriptorium, surrounded by stacks of old books and fragments of parchment. "This isn't just a manuscript," Alessandra said one night, her voice tinged with awe. "It's a map of knowledge, written by someone who wanted to protect secrets that the world wasn't ready for." Marco nodded, his brow furrowed. "But why hide it? Why leave clues scattered like breadcrumbs across centuries?" "Perhaps they feared the power of what they knew," Alessandra replied. "Or perhaps they hoped someone, someday, would be worthy of uncovering it. Unveiling the codex's secrets." Days turned into weeks as they pieced together the codex's riddles. Alessandra's expertise in cartography and Marco's skill in deciphering ancient texts proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered fragments of Greek, Latin, and Arabic script, interwoven with cryptic symbols and intricate illustrations. The breakthrough came late one night, when Marco noticed a pattern in the symbols, a recurring motif of stars and mountain peaks. Cross-referencing these with an ancient map Alessandra had discovered years earlier, they realized the codex pointed to a location deep in the Anatolian mountains. "The library," Alessandra whispered, her fingers trembling as she traced the lines on the map. "The codex is leading us to a library, one that might have survived the fall of empires." Marco's heart raced. The idea was staggering. Legend spoke of libraries rivaling Alexandria, hidden treasures of human knowledge lost to time. Could this be one of them? Could the codex hold the key to unlocking wisdom that might change the course of history? The weight of their discovery was immense. But as they celebrated their progress, a shadow loomed over their joy. A growing threat. Despite the monastery's isolation, Marco and Alessandra knew that Ludovico's reach was vast. His spies were relentless, and whispers of their presence had begun to circulate among the monks. Marco took to sleeping with the codex tucked beneath his pillow, while Alessandra honed her dagger skills in the monastery's quiet courtyards. The monks, though sworn to peace, sensed the danger. Brother Basilios, the monastery's head librarian, often lingered near Marco and Alessandra, offering quiet words of encouragement. "Knowledge is a light in dark times," he said one evening. "But it can also be a flame that attracts the moths." Marco appreciated the wisdom, but it did little to ease his growing anxiety. He knew they were running out of time. Ludovico would not stop until he had the codex and its secrets for himself. The Night of Flames. The attack came without warning. On a moonless night, the monastery's serene halls erupted into chaos. The first sign was the acrid smell of smoke, followed by the shouts of monks as flames licked at the edges of the scriptorium. Marco jolted awake, the codex clutched to his chest, as Alessandra burst into his quarters, her face illuminated by the flickering orange glow of fire. "They found us," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Ludovico's men are here." Marco's stomach clenched. He could hear the clash of steel and the cries of the monks as they tried to defend their sanctuary. Alessandra pulled him to his feet, her dagger already drawn. "We have to go. Now." They navigated the smoke-filled corridors, the codex pressed tightly to Marco's chest. Around them, centuries-old manuscripts and priceless relics were consumed by the flames, the air thick with ash and despair. Marco's heart ached at the loss, but he knew their mission was greater than any one library, no matter how sacred. As they reached the outer courtyard, Ludovico himself emerged from the shadows, his sword glinting in the firelight. His expression was one of triumph, his eyes locked onto the codex in Marco's arms. "You've led me on quite the chase," Ludovico said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. "But it ends here." Alessandra stepped forward, her dagger raised. "You'll have to go through me first." A tense standoff ensued, the flames casting dancing shadows on the ancient stone walls. Ludovico's men began to close in, but Alessandra's sharp eyes caught an opening. With a swift movement, she lunged at Ludovico, forcing him back just long enough for Marco to slip past. "Run!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Marco hesitated, his heart torn, but he knew she was right. Clutching the codex, he darted through the burning courtyard, the shouts of Ludovico's men fading behind him. Alessandra followed moments later, her breath ragged but her resolve unbroken. A narrow escape. They fled into the night, the codex their only possession and the weight of their mission their only anchor. The monastery burned behind them, its ancient walls crumbling under the onslaught of fire and violence. Marco and Alessandra did not look back. They couldn't. By dawn, they had reached the edge of a dense forest, where they collapsed beneath the shelter of towering pines. Marco's hands trembled as he opened the codex, ensuring it had survived the ordeal. The familiar scent of aged parchment and saffron calmed him, even as the memory of the flames lingered in his mind. Alessandra leaned against a tree, her grey eyes scanning the horizon. "They won't stop," she said, her voice low. "Ludovico will hunt us to the ends of the earth. Then we'll make sure he never finds us," Marco replied, determination hardening his voice. "The library is out there, waiting. And we're going to find it." As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the canopy, they knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, Marco felt a glimmer of hope. The codex had survived, and with it, the promise of a discovery that could reshape the world. Chapter 6: The Legacy Preserved. The journey to the hidden library was grueling, a test of endurance and determination. Guided by the codex's cryptic instructions, Marco and Alessandra navigated treacherous mountain passes, crossed frigid streams, and camped beneath a canopy of stars. The codex's ancient illustrations, now clear after weeks of study, led them to an isolated valley shrouded in mist. Here, the air seemed alive with an otherworldly stillness, as if the land itself guarded secrets long forgotten. As they descended into the valley, they saw it, an imposing structure carved into the face of a mountain, its walls adorned with intricate patterns of vines, stars, and celestial symbols. The entrance was flanked by towering statues of scholars, their hands outstretched as though offering knowledge to the heavens. "This is it," Alessandra breathed, her voice barely audible. Marco nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of awe and trepidation. The library, their destination, their obsession, lay before them, its gates sealed but inviting, like a silent guardian of forgotten truths. The hidden library. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the scent of aged parchment and stone. Their torches illuminated endless shelves lined with scrolls, codices, and manuscripts, some so delicate they seemed to disintegrate under the weight of the light. There were artifacts, too, astrolabes, carved tablets, and instruments whose purposes defied comprehension. Alessandra ran her fingers over a table inlaid with golden constellations. "This place, it's a miracle," she whispered. "A repository of everything we've lost and more." As they ventured deeper, they encountered the library's sole inhabitant, an elderly monk whose presence seemed to embody the timeless wisdom of the place. Draped in robes of deep crimson and gold, his serene face bore the lines of countless years, and his eyes held the weight of endless knowledge. "Welcome," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Your arrival was foretold in the stars and the codices. You have come seeking the wisdom of the ages, but be warned, knowledge is a gift and a burden." The monk introduced himself as Brother Andronikos, the last in a line of caretakers tasked with preserving the library. "You are not the first to seek this place, but few are worthy of its treasures. Tell me, why have you come?" Marco hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "We seek to protect and preserve this knowledge," he said, his voice earnest. "The world is at a crossroads. We must ensure that this wisdom is used to enlighten, not destroy." Brother Andronikos studied them for a long moment before nodding. "Then the library is yours to safeguard. But know this, what you take from here must be shared wisely. Knowledge is like fire, it can illuminate or consume. A legacy of enlightenment." For weeks, Marco and Alessandra immersed themselves in the library's treasures. They uncovered texts on medicine that described surgical techniques centuries ahead of their time, astronomical charts that mapped stars unseen by the naked eye, and philosophical treatises that challenged the boundaries of human thought. Each discovery deepened their understanding of the library's purpose and their responsibility as its stewards. Among the scrolls, Marco found a journal penned by one of the library's original creators. Its final entry read, "Let this sanctuary endure not as a monument to the past, but as a beacon for the future. Let those who find it wield its knowledge with wisdom and humility." The codex, which had been their guide, was revealed to be part of a larger system, a key that unlocked deeper chambers within the library. Together, Marco and Alessandra catalogued as much as they could, preserving the most essential discoveries for their return to Venice. The return to Venice. The journey back to Venice was bittersweet. They carried with them not only manuscripts and artifacts, but also the weight of their promise to Brother Andronikos and the generations of scholars who had preserved the library. As they approached the familiar canals and marble facades of their city, they knew their task had only just begun. In Venice, Marco and Alessandra established a secret society of scholars, carefully selecting those who could be trusted to study and disseminate the library's knowledge. They worked in the shadows, ensuring that their discoveries sparked innovation without falling into the hands of those who might exploit them. The knowledge they shared ignited a renaissance in the arts and sciences. Venetian shipbuilders integrated advanced designs from the library, revolutionizing navigation. Physicians applied ancient medical practices to save lives. Philosophers challenged dogmas, paving the way for a new era of intellectual freedom. Ludovico's downfall. Meanwhile, Ludovico Farnese, disgraced by his failure to claim the codex, faded into obscurity. Stripped of his influence and abandoned by his allies, he spent his remaining years in bitterness, a cautionary tale of ambition and tempered by wisdom. For Marco and Alessandra, his defeat was not a victory to celebrate, but a reminder of the fine line they walked. They knew that the pursuit of knowledge, when driven by greed, could lead to ruin. The legend endures. As the years passed, Marco and Alessandra's names became synonymous with courage and discovery. Though their society remained secret, whispers of their achievements spread across Europe. They were celebrated not only as scholars but also as protectors of humanity's shared legacy. In time, their story became legend, a tale of a humble librarian and a bold cartographer who braved countless dangers to preserve the light of knowledge in an age of darkness. The library in the Anatolian mountains remained hidden, its secrets safe under the watchful eyes of new caretakers. And though Marco and Alessandra never returned, their legacy endured in every book that was read, every discovery that was made, and every mind that dared to dream. As Marco had once said, the past is our compass, and knowledge is the light that guides us forward.